Here. And without further ado, Robert Bryce is our keynote speaker. He's an author, journalist, podcaster, and film producer. Very prolific in all of those. He has been writing about energy, politics, and innovation for more than 3 decades. He's the author of 6 books, including his latest, A Question of Power, Electricity and the Wealth of Nations. A great book to check out. Bryce is also the host of the Power Hungry podcast and producer of the new 5-part docuseries, Juice, Power, Politics, and the Grid. And I've listened to that a good bit. It's great. And it's available for free on YouTube. And you can follow him on Substack at robertbryce.substack.com. Robert lives in Austin with his wife, Lauren, who is a teacher, photographer, and master potter. Please welcome Robert Bryce.
Thanks, Cody. Good afternoon. Hey, this works. Good afternoon. Hello. Good afternoon. There you are. 14 months ago, it was almost exactly 14 months ago, we're standing on a metal grate platform, you know, kind of the kind you find on industrial sites. I'm sure many of you are familiar with them. And it was about as wide as this stage and maybe about this deep, and there was a hand railing all around. It was with a group of about 14 people. It was a cool day, kind of cloudy and a little windy. And we were standing on this metal grate platform, and we were facing east toward the Pacific Ocean. And I was looking at the Pacific and where we were, and I was trying to calculate about the elevation, about where we were, how high we were above the Pacific. And I'm guessing it was 125 feet or so. And I was trying to calculate, looking at the hillside in front of us, where the 15-meter mark was. And in front of us, the Pacific, but right in front of us, to the left, was the biggest crane I've ever seen. And I've been fortunate in my career. I've traveled a fair amount around the world. This crane was probably 30 stories high. Massive. Huge wheels. The counterweights were as 10 feet high. And it was standing right next to reactor number 1 at Fukushima Daiichi. Reactor number 1 was here. Reactor 2 was here. Reactor 3 and 4 were over here. And this was the closest we were going to be allowed to the reactors at the Fukushima Daiichi site. Behind us were 1,000 water tanks that were filled with the water that had been contaminated from the water that had infiltrated underneath the reactors and had been treated by Tokyo Electric Power Company and detritiated. And as you probably have heard, that tritiated water now is being slowly released into the Pacific Ocean. It's one thing to say 1,000 water tanks. It's a whole other one to see 1,000 water tanks. In fact, every square meter available space on the Fukushima Daiichi site was covered with either a water treatment facility or water tanks. So why am I telling you about this visit to Fukushima Daiichi? Well, one, it's so recent and so ingrained in my mind, and it was a pivotal experience. We heard about Fukushima Daiichi and the nuclear accident, but how many of you know that not one person died from radiation at Fukushima Daiichi? Not one. There were 2 people at the plant who died. They were workers who drowned. And in spending 2 weeks in Japan, now in early 2022, what was the issue for the Japanese, and what were the remembrances of, because the March 11th date was coming up? It was of the 20,000 Japanese who died in the tsunami and the earthquake. We're focused almost exclusively, the news about Fukushima Daiichi focuses almost completely on the nuclear power plant with no discussion of the tsunami or the earthquake or the aftermath. And in fact, the people in Fukushima Prefecture, it was an odd place because all the people had been moved out, remember, over the excessive fear of radiation. And the mortality studies later found that moving those people out caused more deaths than would have been had occurred had they been left in place. So why was I trying to figure out 15 meters above the waterline? Because that was the height of the tsunami. The power plant was ready. The standby generators were located 7 meters above the waterline. They got hit with a 15-meter tsunami. And why is that important? Because when the standby generators went down, then the power plant couldn't run the water pumps to cool the reactors. And then, of course, you had the explosions and the release of radioactive material. Power plants have to have power. Duh. But who would have thought to put the standby generators 15 meters above the waterline instead of 7? They were ready for 7 meters. So what are the other reasons? Why am I also starting with this story? Well, one, it's vivid to me, and I'm lucky to be able to go to Fukushima Daiichi. But in 2 weeks in meetings with Japanese officials at utilities, government officials, nuclear power officials, I asked the same question in every meeting. What about climate change? What about CO2 emissions here in Japan, the home of the Kyoto Protocol? The first international treaty signed in 1992 to limit CO2 emissions. And in every meeting, government officials, utility officials, all had the same reaction. Yeah, well, energy security is our first concern. We'll deal with CO2 later in the home of the Kyoto Protocol. There is no energy transition happening in Japan. I live in Austin, Texas. I see more electric vehicles in Austin, Texas than I saw in 2 weeks in Tokyo. The concern in Japan today is energy security. And in fact, in our docuseries that just came out on January 31st, we interviewed Nobuo Tanaka, who's the former head of the International Energy Agency. He's a Japanese man. And he said on camera, we have him talking about, we have China over here, Russia over here, North Korea over here. This is a bad neighborhood. We have to have nuclear power, and we're restarting our nuclear power plants, but he also made it clear energy security is their first concern. Now, by a show of hands, how many of you know that Tokyo Electric Power Company is now building 2 coal-fired power plants on Tokyo Bay? How many of you know that there are 5 gigawatts of gas-fired generation that are now being built in Japan? Doesn't fit the narrative, does it? But in fact, TEPCO, Tokyo Electric Power Company, by the middle of the summer, we'll have finished the second of 2 ultra-supercritical coal-fired power plants on Tokyo Bay. And along with other utilities, and the other Japanese utilities, there are only 11 of them, they're building 5 gigawatts of new gas-fired capacity because Japan is recognizing energy security is their first concern. So energy transition. Let's talk about the energy transition. Here's this is President Biden in 2022 talking about the incredible transition that's underway. Here is the Sierra Club, one of the big promoters of this idea of the energy transition last year. And here is the White House press release from December. So there's a great quote from the industrial analyst W. Edwards Deming, who's the late W. Edwards Deming, who said, "In God we trust, all others bring data." Well, I'm going to hit you with a stat bomb today. I'm going to hit you with some data. I'm going to hit you with a lot of data. So when I tell you that this idea, these claims about the energy transition are largely manufactured and do not reflect reality, here's the data. Not my numbers, the numbers. My friend Roger Pilkey Jr., who teaches at CU Boulder, used this idea, and I've stole it from him. Amateurs borrow, professionals steal, by the way. The quote is variously attributed to Pablo Picasso and John Lennon. But nevertheless, he used this idea. You go to the New York Times website, you go to their archive, and you can search for a given word or phrase in their archive, and you can do it by year. So that's what I did. So from the end of the Trump era, or the end of the Obama era, 2015, 2016, these are the occurrences of the phrase energy transition in the pages of the New York Times. The entire Trump era, the end of the Trump era, 2020, 21 uses of that phrase. What happens in 2021? Joe Biden becomes president, and in a 4-year period, the number of times that the energy transition appears in the pages of the New York Times goes up 10x. Oh, well, is that a coincidence? I don't think so. I don't believe in coincidences when it comes to issues like this. Why? Because of the staggering amounts of money that are being spent by all of the claims about the energy transition. So why would these numbers be going up this rapidly? Except for what I think is very clearly a very well-funded, very well-coordinated campaign by some very wealthy NGOs, Sierra Club, NRDC, Rocky Mountain Institute, Environmental Defense Fund, to promote this idea of the energy transition. So is there an energy transition happening or not? I don't see it. Now, I'm from Oklahoma, I'm from Tulsa, I'm a little slow. So if there's an energy transition, explain to me slowly how it's happening and where it's happening, because the numbers, not my numbers, the numbers, show quite the opposite. Bloomberg New Energy Finance numbers, 4.1 trillion spent on wind and solar between 2004 and 2022. And what happened in 2004? Effectively no wind and solar in terms of primary energy globally. Total energy use was 445 exajoules. $4.1 trillion spent, and what is that, 18 years later in 2022, wind and solar are 5% of global energy. They're contributing 32 exajoules, but hydrocarbons increased by 110, 3 times faster than the growth in wind and solar combined. The numbers, by the way, Statistical Review of World Energy. Not my numbers, the numbers. And raise your hand if you know what an exajoule is. You get extra points. There's one. That's good. In a crowd of 200. An exajoule, it's an SI unit. Kilo, mega, giga, tera, peta, exazeta, yoda. You've heard of these. You've heard of Yoda. Nod your head. Yes, Yoda. Heard of kilo, mega, giga. Hello, yes. It's a septillion joules. It's roughly equal to a quadrillion BTUs. You've heard of a quadrillion BTUs. Nod your head, yes. It's roughly equal to the energy contained in 1 trillion cubic feet of natural gas. Not my numbers, the numbers. Where is the energy transition? It's not shown in the numbers. Statistical Review of World Energy Data, world's 6 largest economies. I'm going to show you these same numbers in just a minute in a different chart. All of these charts are ones that I made. You can tell they're very simple. They're the only kind I can make. My Excel skills are minimal. Here's China, India, and then the US, Germany, UK, Japan. Germany is spending $1 trillion. They will waste $1 trillion on their energy venda, and they have run their economy into the ditch on this silly notion that they can run their economy on wind and solar. How is Germany going to solve climate change when India and China are growing so rapidly? Same numbers, horizontal bar chart, my favorite format. Why? Because it's easy to read. Same chart, easier to read, I think. The US has reduced its CO2 emissions more than any country in the world by far since 2000, largely because of natural gas displacing coal in the power sector. Wind and solar have done some, but nearly all of that reduction in CO2 emissions has happened in electricity, not transportation, just the electric sector. Meanwhile, what has happened in India and China? Massive growth that swamps any of the reductions that have happened in the 4 other large economies in the world. Am I saying we don't have to do anything about climate change? No, that's not what I'm saying. What I am saying, and I want you to take home if you can, we have to be very sober about the approach that we're taking to the issues of decarbonization. We, the US, I'm speaking the papal we, the collective we here, the United States is not going to solve climate change. Not unless or until we can back out coal-fired generation in China and India. And these are the numbers that are truly eye-popping, and these are numbers that I put together from Global Energy Monitor, an anti-coal NGO, and the International Atomic Energy Agency. I'm pro-nuclear. China is building more nuclear power than any other country in the world, but it's building 6 times more coal-fired capacity than it's building nuclear capacity. This is the reality, not the spin. Not this idea of where is the energy transition in China? There ain't one. Yes, they're building a lot of solar. Yes, they're building a lot of wind. And they're building a lot of nuclear. But China is still a coal story, and so is India. And until we accept that and understand we need to reverse these numbers, if it was 136,000 megawatts of nuclear and only 22,000 megawatts of coal, then we're getting somewhere. But the latest numbers from Global Energy Monitor, global coal-fired capacity last year grew 2%. 2/3 of that was in China. The rest of it was in India and places like Indonesia and Vietnam. So let me just take a quick step back. Now, these are numbers from the EIA that I just pulled down the other day. They don't agree with the numbers that were presented this morning. Colorado is, according to the gentleman from the governor's office, you're 4th among oil producers. Rank among gas producers, you're 9th instead of 8th. 10th in terms of overall energy production. Ranked in energy consumed per capita, average cost of your electricity, 14 cents. You're about 10% below the U.S. average, which is now about 16 cents. So just wanted to let you know, these are just, the top line numbers that I think about when I come to Colorado. And I have deep roots in Colorado. I met my wife, Lauren, at UC Boulder, or CU Boulder, 42 years ago in an English class. I asked her for her notes, and I got them. We'll be married 38 years, June 7th. So love to come back to Colorado. But back to the theme here. What energy transition? Statistical review of world energy numbers. Again, in 2022, gas use on an exajoule basis, now back to exajoules, which is equal to a quad. We know this now. Nod your head. Yes, we know what an exajoule is. No one's nodding. Yes, I know what an exajoule is. Growth in wind and solar in 2022, 0.8 exajoules. Growth in natural gas alone, 1.6. Net hydrocarbon increase, 1.5. So despite the massive amounts of money, and I'll come back to that in a minute, that the U.S. is spending on wind and solar and batteries, the rest of it, natural gas growth is still the story. And it was even more the story last year. This data just came out from the Energy Information Administration in their February electric power monthly numbers. Remember, this decarbonization that is being talked about is happening almost exclusively in the electric sector. Hasn't really touched industrial, commercial, or transportation. But gas-fired generation last year, according to the EIA, grew 6.8%. Wind energy, despite adding 6 gigawatts of new capacity, fell 2%. And the net increase in natural gas production, net gas-fired generation, 115 terawatt hours. The addition from wind and solar was 12. How many of you read about this in the New York Times? It doesn't fit the narrative. And let me just be clear about my politics here. Now, I've been a journalist my whole career. I've been a reporter my whole career. I've never had a real job. I used to think the liberal media was a fiction. I don't anymore. And I come from the left. I used to write for the Austin Chronicle. It's a liberal biweekly. It was biweekly, now it's weekly. But after watching the coverage of energy and power systems, watching what's happening with these ideas around the energy transition, renewables, et cetera, New York Times has an agenda, and their reporters write to the agenda. They don't report the numbers in a nonpartisan way because it doesn't fit the narrative. And I'm telling you that just as honestly as I can. So what are my politics? I'm not a Republican. I'm not a Democrat. I am disgusted. November, oh gee, I'm so looking forward to going to the ballot box and choosing between doddering old fool 1 and doddering old fool 2. Oh gee, I'm so excited about this. We have a lot of political problems in this country, and we have 2 presidential candidates that excite no one in the electorate. I was on at a conference where Karl Rove was one of the other speakers, and he had this line where he's talking about, well, politics has actually been worse in America. And I thought, oh, well, that's great. I'm really comforted because I'm not very comforted today. So those are my politics. And what about climate change? Climate change is a concern. It's not our only concern. We have to balance decarbonization efforts, all of these other things, talking about decarbonization, environmental justice, with the realities about affordable, reliable, and resilient energy and power systems. And what we're being inundated with by policymakers and by the media is this idea, oh, decarbonization is the only goal. It is not the only goal. We have to balance the efforts that we make on decarbonization with other needs in society, and particularly a resilient and reliable electric grid. What about natural gas? We're here, obviously, in Garfield County, which is a big natural gas producer. These numbers surprised even me, and I wrote about this on my Substack, robertbryce.substack.com. Last Thursday, the U.S. produces more gas than Iran, China, Canada, Qatar, and Norway combined. How many of you knew that? And a lot of this gas, this is in exajoules. This is from the Statistical Review of World Energy. I could put that in trillion cubic feet. It would be almost the same number, by the way. 35 Ts. And about 6 or 7 trillion cubic feet of that is coming out of the Permian Basin, and no one in the Permian Basin is drilling for gas. They're all drilling for oil. This is all associated gas coming from the Permian. And a lot of the gas coming out of Weld County is associated gas. 43% of U.S. electricity generated from gas. My first book was on Enron. I've written 6 books. It's hard to believe it's now 22 years since my book on Enron came out. Enron, of course, created the gas bank and was one of the first companies to really promote this idea of gas-fired generation and making merchant plants as gas-fired merchant plants. When Enron failed in 2001, total power burn for natural gas in the U.S. was 5.3 T's a year. Last year, it's 12.9. That the share of gas has gone from about 16, gas's share of electric generation has gone from 16% to 43% in that, 23-year period, 22-year period. So gas is now a dominant fuel in power generation and, in fact, an irreplaceable fuel. And while we talk a lot about solar and wind, there's only really one. Batteries, yeah, okay, batteries. Batteries stink. Batteries still stink. They stank when Thomas Edison was in short pants. They stink today. I'll come back to that in a minute. 79% of all primary energy in the U.S. comes from oil and gas. So tell me, and go slowly, tell me where and how we're going to get rid that massive amount of energy when wind provides 4% and solar provides 2%. Again, these are statistical review of world energy numbers, not mine. So how do we go from 6% to 79% by 2030, by 2050? You name your timeline. And how do you do it in Colorado? And all due respect to the woman from this morning, from Ms. Antis from the Energy Office, no discussion of land use. None. No discussion of costs that I heard. So she presented well, had her, the objectives, but these are massive numbers, and the scale issue is the issue. Power density, energy density, cost, and scale. Those are the challenges. They're always the challenges in any kind of energy transition, rather. So who's pushing this decarbonization, energy policy agenda, natural gas bans? A lot of it is dark money. Again, I'm telling you, clearly, I don't have a dog in this fight. I don't work for industry. I'm an independent journalist. But I'm one of the only people reporting on the issue of dark money that is influencing policy, and the amount of money that they are spending is staggering. And it dwarfs anything that's the natural gas industry or the oil industry is doing. You know, those troglodytes from Chevron and ExxonMobil and, those bad people. Right? Oh, they're just getting such unconscionable amounts of subsidies, and they're just, all their money is just going to, convince people about, wind and solar are bad. Here's the reality. The NGOs that are pushing gas bans and decarbonization are working on budgets of hundreds of millions of dollars a year. The Climate Imperative Foundation, how many of you have heard of that? Out of the gate, it just was founded in 2021. Out of the gate, its budget was more than $200 million. Who are their funders? Laureen Powell Jobs and John Doerr. And who are they? It's all dark money. They don't reveal the names of their funders. And they're funding the Sierra Club, Rocky Mountain Institute. Rocky Mountain Institute here in Colorado, that's a 2021 number. There are different numbers, different ways to compute the amount of money they're taking in. Rocky Mountain Institute, founded by Emory Levins, promoting the soft path of energy since the 1970s. Their budget since 2012 has gone up 10x, from $10 million to over $117 million. Follow the money. We can talk about climate change. We can talk about concern about climate change. Well, where's the money coming from and who's getting it? These NGOs have a stake in the fight. They're bureaucracies just like any other bureaucracy. And what's their first job? Maintain the bureaucracy. And they're pushing policy. And they're being incredibly effective. Let's give them their due. There's no doubt about it. So what about electrify everything? This is the other push mentioned this morning. Electrify transportation, commercial buildings, and industry. And do it with renewable energy. The Electrify Everything effort is a war on natural gas. These are all headlines, all screen grabs. Mayor Wu in Boston, New York City imposed a natural gas ban. It's a local law 97. In addition to the gas ban, it will be ruinous for the city of New York. According to the Sierra Club, which has been tracking them, 76 communities in California have banned the use of natural gas, direct use of natural gas. Most recent one is the state of Washington. Jay Inslee last month signed into law a bill that aims to put Puget Sound Energy's gas business out of business, despite 2 rulings from the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals that says that, in fact, those bans are illegal. More history, more numbers, not my numbers, the numbers. I'm going to be 64 years old on July 19th. You could send me a card. I'm an old guy. When I was 10 years old, residential gas consumption in the United States was 5 trillion cubic feet a year. 52 years later, it's still 5 trillion cubic feet a year. So why is there this push to ban gas stoves? We're told we need to ban gas stoves and gas heaters and gas appliances because it's a climate issue. That is the promotion, that is the spin, I would even say the propaganda, being pushed by the Sierra Club, Rocky Mountain Institute, et cetera. Oh, you have to ban your gas stove because of climate change. Why didn't they go after gas-fired generation? I showed you before how much gas is now going into the power sector. I think they're going after residential gas because it's an easier fight, an easier political fight. So why, it's kind of a remarkable slide too for a couple of reasons. In 1970, the population of the United States was about 220 million. Today it's 330 million. We've added 50 million some odd households, and in that time frame, gas consumption hasn't increased. What's the story there? Well, some of it's all electric homes, but the other part is more efficient gas furnaces, gas stoves, gas appliances of all kinds. So what about energy security? And this is a new slide, one that I haven't presented before and only published once, but nevertheless, this idea of electrify everything is absolute pure foolishness. I will say this, and all due respect to anyone who's pushing that agenda, but the idea that we can put this massive amount of energy load onto the electric grid is terrible for energy security. Energy security comes from variety and variety alone. We have two major grids, the electric grid and the gas grid. These are numbers that the AGA put out just recently with EIA and S&P Global numbers. Winter Storm Heather, just 3 months ago, during that winter storm, nationally, the electric grid provided 48 trillion BTUs of energy. And because it's in BTUs per day, we could call it 48 trillion BTUs of power, because energy over time is a power number. But the gas grid provided 118 trillion BTUs of energy on the coldest day of January 15th during Winter Storm Heather. So the other night after I put these together in this spreadsheet, I drafted the slide, and I was going to sleep actually, and I thought, well, how much is 118 trillion BTUs? That means absolutely nothing to me. Well, it's 20.3 million barrels of oil. It's a staggeringly large amount of energy. And the idea that you're going to add this much energy, look how long this is, and you're going to add it to the electric grid and make this instead 150 trillion cubic feet, or what is that, 160 trillion trillion BTUs of gas, and you're going to do it by 20, how? And why ever, how do you think you're going to be able to build the grid that and make it that resilient and that affordable in such a short amount of time? 20 million barrels a day, that's what the US consumes nationally. Every day is about 20 million barrels of oil. So every car that's in the parking lot, every car that's in Colorado, every car that's in the country, all of their daily energy use is how much the gas grid consumed. Well, that's only about, the transportation use is only about 9 million, right? Or 10 or 11 million total with jet fuel and the rest of it. This is now a staggering amount of energy. Why is no one talking about this from an energy security standpoint? That's the story. And yet, oh, we were going to shut down the gas grid and electrify everything. What about energy security? The gas grid is an integral part of energy security in this country, and particularly in places like Colorado. I heard it gets cold here in the wintertime. It gets cold in Texas sometimes too. I know this for a fact. The Ninth Circuit, I mentioned this before. On January 2nd, their second ruling on this, where they said that in the Energy Policy and Conservation Act of 1975 makes it illegal for cities like Berkeley. Remember, the city of Berkeley was the first to ban natural gas back in 2019. It preempts Berkeley's building code. So yet Jay Inslee and the legislators in Washington passed a law that is in direct violation of what the Ninth Circuit had already ruled on. Why? I mean, aren't they reading the papers? Do they not understand the legal implications? What to me it says is that these entities are just saying, well, sue us. Sue us, but they have sued. And now there is a case pending in the Second Circuit. In fact, Sarah Jorgensen, who's the lead lawyer for the California Restaurant Association, which was the lead plaintiff in this litigation against the city of Berkeley, and now and they won, and that ruling applies to the entire Ninth Circuit. which is Alaska, Washington, Idaho, if memory serves, Oregon, California, Guam, Hawaii, Arizona. It's a big circuit. So that ruling applies to the entire Ninth Circuit. Now there's litigation in the Second Circuit, and it was filed in New York by a propane dealer, filed by the very same lawyer under the very same issues of the Energy Policy and Conservation Act, saying these electrify everything policies are illegal under federal law. So I think they're going to win in New York, which will be the precedent for the Second Circuit. But now we have 11 circuits in the United States. I mean, who are the lawyers in the we have 9 circuits in the U.S.? Oh, surely there's a lawyer here. 11? Right. And by the way, oh yes, it's John, right? Yeah, right. John's a lawyer. So here's a joke at John's expense. So, our policymakers are almost all lawyers. And you know why they're lawyers? They couldn't do the math to get into engineering school. John's going, yeah, I can't do math. Electrify everything, who pays? It's not just about energy security. It's not just that it's illegal according to federal law. It's a regressive tax on the poor and the middle class. Not my numbers, the numbers. Department of Energy data from August of 2023, electricity costs 3 times more than gas on a per BTU basis. We could change it to exajoules if you like. The denominator doesn't matter. It's still the dollars per unit of energy. It's more expensive. Okay, so we're just going to build a whole lot of wind and solar, and we're going to put it out there, in flyover country, like Garfield County. Or those other counties where there are a bunch of Trump voters. We're going to just put it out there, where, people won't complain. Well, people are complaining, and they're complaining all across the country. This is the Redmond Bridge in Madison County, Iowa. I speak all over the country. I was in Des Moines twice last year, and I went to Madison County. It's right outside of Des Moines. It's a picturesque place. Bridges of Madison County, you've heard of this, right? Yes? Pretty good movie with Clint Eastwood and Meryl Streep. Obviously, there's no wind turbine there. My daughter Mary made this graphic. But it's one of the most famous bridges in America. And the residents of Madison County were adamantly opposed to a wind project that Mid-American Energy was pushing in Madison County. Mid-American Energy is a subsidiary of Berkshire Hathaway, headed by a guy named Warren Buffett, who in 2014 said the only reason to build wind turbines is to get the tax credits. That's an almost direct quote. Well, in 2021, after Madison County, passed an ordinance that effectively outlawed new wind projects, Mid-American sued Madison County. How many of you have heard about this? Yeah, exactly 0. 1. If the oil and gas industry was acting like the wind industry, it would be pilloried on the front pages of the New York Times, left and right. But it doesn't fit the narrative, so it doesn't get covered. I've had the Madison County supervisor, her name will come to me in just a minute. I've had her on my podcast. But it's not just Madison County, it's all across America. Local communities are fighting back and saying, we don't want these wind projects. We don't want these solar projects either. Go put them where the wind doesn't blow and the sun doesn't shine. We don't want them here. Mid-American later, in one of the biggest PR blunders of all time, they filed suit to try to force Madison County to take this wind project. They later folded their tent, and the county residents celebrated. Finally, Madison County, Iowa, Cherokee County, Kansas, Reno County, Kansas, San Bernardino County, California, the largest county by area in America, 1,900 square miles. Can't build large-scale wind or solar in San Bernardino County, in a state that has a 100% clean electricity mandate by 2045. Meeker and Chippewa counties, Minnesota, Gage County, Nebraska. The Golan Heights, last June. The Druze Arabs who lived there rioted for 2 days to stop a wind project that had been proposed for their area. I think 12 people went to the hospital, including Israeli cops. After the battles were over, the Israeli police told Netanyahu, you want to build this wind project? You do it on your own. We're not going to provide security. That project has not been built, won't be built, because the Israelis now have other concerns at hand. How many of you heard about the riots in the Golan Heights? Again, doesn't fit the narrative. And the wind and solar lobbies, give them credit. They're very aggressive. They aggressively attack anyone who criticizes them. I know for a fact because I'm one of them. the oil and gas industry had acted the same way the wind industry has, they would be pilloried. And I think the wind industry has acted shamefully, absolutely shamefully, in the way that they have attacked rural America with lawsuits, individual lawsuits, including a lawsuit by NextEra Energy against a slap suit against a Canadian woman named Esther Reitman. These are the rejections. I've tabulated them just because I'm a hardhead. I'm still following up. Wind and solar industries never question any of my data. They don't want to talk about it. They keep claiming, oh, these rejections are happening because the fossil fuel industry is paying all these people. It's a bold-faced lie, and I'm going to use that word. I don't like to use that word. It's just a fact. Republicans, Democrats, rural residents of all kinds are coming together and saying, we don't want these projects. We're concerned about our neighborhood. Let's work together. 422 rejections of wind. I'll get to the solar numbers in just a second. This one really cheers me, really makes me happy. I'm from Oklahoma. I have deep roots in Oklahoma. My uncle Ernie Rapp was an Osage tribal member. He was born in Fairfax, Oklahoma in 1909 and had a front row seat to the Reign of Terror. The Reign of Terror, as you recall, if you've seen Martin Scorsese's film or read David Grand's book, Killers of the Flower Moon, it's a remarkable book. What happened? A bunch of white folks came into the Osage County, Oklahoma, and were killing Osage to get their mineral wealth. And now the Italian company didn't kill any Osages, but they invaded Osage County, violated the tribe's sovereignty by mining the rocks on Osage tribal land. And instead of stopping, when the BIA sent them a letter in 2014 saying, you're illegally mining, you need to get a permit from the tribe, they sped up the work to get the wind turbines built. And on December 20th, the federal judge in Tulsa, issued this ruling saying the tribe won permanent injunctive relief and ejectment, which is a new legal term for me, meaning those 84 wind turbines that the company built have to be taken down at a cost of $300 million. It's going to cost Enel more to take those wind turbines down than it costs to build them. Now, Enel is still trying to fight this judgment, and they're still trying to seek some other alternative, and they've hired some of the most expensive law firms in America, including Gibson Dunn and Norton Rose, to try and drag out the litigation because they want to delay as long as possible the ejectment of these wind turbines. But I will tell you, Tulsa's my hometown. I know the principal chief of the Osage. I'm a member of the Cherokee tribe. I'm going to be in Oklahoma to see those wind turbines coming down, and I'm going to be cheering it on. Because again, if the oil and gas industry had acted this way, it'd be front page news in the New York Times. The Times has not reported a word about this, not one, because it doesn't fit the narrative. Stories about the Dakota Access Pipeline, protests about the Keystone XL, other things. Oh yeah, dozens of stories. But here is a foreign company invading Native American lands here in the United States, crickets. Not a single story in the Associated Press. Solar rejections, again, at least 200. A lot of the wind projects are now becoming solar projects because they have smaller footprints and wind is getting increasingly difficult to site. These are the cumulative rejections, 639. That number is actually a little higher now because of some recent rejections, but I maintain the renewable rejection database all myself. And again, the American Clean Power Association, the American Wind Energy Association, the solar industry, they don't want to talk about this. They don't cite this work. They don't cite my, because it doesn't fit this narrative about clean, green, renewable. It's none of those. It's alternative energy. Okay, so where are you going to put it? That's one part of the challenge. How are you going to connect it? How do you build high voltage transmission? This is the other part of the issue here that is increasingly difficult, more and more friction. Last February, the Department of Energy put out this study that said the U.S. needs 57% growth in high voltage transmission. The report, which was just absolutely dreadful, and I've read a lot of dreadful federal reports, didn't include any numbers on the amount of miles of high voltage transmission. So I did the homework for them. It's 230 kV and above. We have about 240,000 miles. According to C3 Group, based out of Atlanta, we're building about 1,700 miles a year. Okay, well, 57% growth, that's about 137,000 miles. It'll only take 80 years. Maybe we better get started. But this connection, this transmission discussion is one that these studies from the Stanford University, Mark Jacobson, from Princeton University, Jesse Jenkins have come out with these studies. Oh, we'll just add all this renewables. Okay, Even if you had the land, you don't. You can't connect it because you can't build the transmission fast enough. In fact, this opposition, by the way, I should have had this slide before the transmission slide. The opposition to wind and solar is so stout all across the country that these 4 heavily Democratic states have passed legislation that allows bureaucrats in their state capitals to Bigfoot local communities. New York, California, Michigan, and Illinois. That's how strong the backlash is. Again, doesn't fit the narrative, does it? Back to the high voltage transmission, the amount being added is actually flat or declining. That number from 2013 is high. Why? Because that's Texas. Those were the CREZ lines that were built almost all in Texas, intrastate. Texas is a big place, right? And I'm from Oklahoma. I'm not bragging about Texas. Let me be clear. But this was all built intrastate. Now, it was a difficult battle on the permitting. Let's be clear. A lot of people were saying, we don't want that line coming across. We're not getting any benefit from that. Put it somewhere else. But that's why that number is so high. So you take the CREZ lines out, and the average number is far lower than that 1,700 miles that, roughly that I'm talking about here, and the trend line is down. S&P Global estimates this number could be as low as 500 miles of high voltage transmission per year. Meanwhile, and this is, you're only the second group that I've shown this slide to, I haven't published it. I think high voltage transmission is hard to build, it is, but we're actually building more natural gas transmission and CO2 and hazardous liquid pipelines than we're building high voltage transmission. Now, I could probably figure out a way to make this chart a little more legible, but the high voltage transmission is the purple, and the hazardous liquid and CO2 is gray, and then the gas transmission is in the blue. So in in most of the years here, we're building far more gas pipelines. We're putting stuff under the ground. Far easier to put it in the ground than put it 200 feet in the air, right? Because that's what a high voltage transmission line is. You're moving energy, but except you have a lot more people who are going to object because they're going to see those 200-foot high pylons, right? So this idea that we're going to build massive amounts of high voltage transmission, no, we're not. Can't be done, won't be done. So what about the incentives? So why is there so much push then behind wind and solar? Well, the Inflation Reduction Act, which is the misnomer of all misnomers, is handing just a scandalous amount of money to alternative energy. Last month, the Treasury issued their estimates for tax expenditures for various federal programs. So in 2015, the cost of the production tax credit and investment tax credit, and the PTC is generally for wind and the ITC is generally for solar, was about $20 billion. That's over the 10-year period, right, from 14 to 23. Their latest numbers from 24 to 33, $425 billion. These are staggering amounts of money, especially when the U.S. is running annual deficits of $2 trillion. And this is all going, it's not all going to solar and wind. It's going to be for batteries and green and colored, rainbow-colored hydrogen and batteries and every other kind of alternative energy scheme, CCUS. I think that's right. Are they getting it under PTC or IT? I've forgotten. But anyway, IRA, this is just the PTC and ITC. So what about those scandalous subsidies that are going to oil and gas? Oh, they're just scandalous. $20 billion over 10 years versus $425 billion for the production tax credit and investment tax credit. Yeah, it really is scandalous. Meanwhile, the threat to the grid is not just from this massive push, this corporate welfare. Let's call it what it is. I'm giving you both barrels here, ladies and gentlemen. It's the NGOs that now have effectively unlimited money. I talked about the amount of money on the anti-gas side. In September, Michael Bloomberg and Bloomberg Philanthropies announced a $500 million gift for Beyond Carbon that will be given to the Sierra Club, Earth Justice, League of Conservation Voters, and others to wage lawfare against the coal industry and the gas industry. And the stated goal from their press release is in quotes there. Shut down every last coal plant and half of all the gas plants. Okay, well, how much is that? That's roughly 40% of all the electricity generation in the United States today. Roughly 1,800 terawatt hours. We generate about 4,200 terawatt hours. Now just imagine that 1,800 terawatt hours that I'm mentioning here, that is the electricity use of the 9 biggest states in America. Where did that little shadow come from? I don't know. Wind is something, I don't know. something happens when you put your slides on the projector. These 9 states use roughly 1,800 terawatt hours of generation. This is the amount of electricity that Michael Bloomberg's Beyond Carbon effort wants to shutter. Now, just as an exercise, imagine if there were a terrorist, not Osama bin Laden, may he rot in hell, someone like him, says, I want to cripple the US economy and I want to shut down 40% of all the electricity generation in the United States, and I want to do it in the next 5 years. The FBI and every law enforcement agency in the country would be on them like white on rice, like stink on poop. And yet here's a man worth $90 billion, gives this gift in the name of climate change that aims to, let's call it what it is, wreck the US electric grid, and there's no analysis of it. Oh, he's a climate activist, a climate hawk, a climate champion. What about the 1,800 terawatt hours that they aim to close? And this is not just idle chit-chat. The Sierra Club has now sued to close, well, they're suing or filed a rate case in FERC that could force the closure of Basin Electric's coal plant in North Dakota. They have a legal agreement with a company called Talon Energy that will force the closure of a coal plant in Maryland called Brandon Shores. Brandon Shores, it's 1,200 megawatts that PJM has said is absolutely essential for reliability. This is the Sierra Club having an effect today. And they're getting money from Michael Bloomberg. And it's undermining the integrity of the electric grid. So my caption is, what's the future of American energy? Well, I won't read those to you, but let me run you through them. So what about electric vehicles? They're not a new thing. In fact, they're an old thing. They've been in the marketplace for more than a century. One of my jobs, I love what I do. It's my purpose and my passion. I don't do anything. This is what I do. I don't play golf. Golf sucks. What I do is talk about energy and power systems. I do a lot of research. I write books. I went to the Library of Congress, and you can search. It's amazing. If you get a chance, get a reader card and go into the Jefferson Reading Room. It's one of the most amazing structures you'll ever be in. But you can also search their archives, and they have digitized archives. Here's the Los Angeles Times in 1901 talking about, electric cars, they're going to be so great as soon as we find an effective battery. Oh, gee, wow. Oh, and then the Washington Post, well, it must be true. Prices are going to continue to drop until they're within reach of the average family. That's 107 years ago? No, 109 years ago. Gallup data, this study just came out. What do they say? In a one-year period, from 2003 to 2004, not my numbers, Gallup's numbers. In 1 year, the number of people who said they would not buy an EV went from 41% to 48%. Who buys them? Who buys them and would not buy? It's Democrats. It's a status vehicle. I've been in North Dakota. I was in Kearney, Nebraska last year. I didn't see any Teslas. I saw a lot of Silverados. I saw a lot of F-150s and a lot of Rams. I did not see any EVs. I did not see any Teslas. This is Gallup data. And this was it yesterday or the day before? Tesla announced a layoff of 10% of their workforce. I live in Austin. Tesla just built a massive new factory just right near the airport. If you fly into Austin, you can't miss it. Massive, massive, one of the biggest buildings I've ever seen in terms of length. It's just enormous. And they're already cutting 10% of their workforce. Why? Because there's not enough consumer pull, and 69% of Republicans say they wouldn't buy it. So why are we being inundated with this foolishness about, we're going to make everyone buy an electric vehicle? It's a vehicle that is largely determined by political ideology. That's the affinity group. What about oil? If oil didn't exist, we'd have to invent it. These are the watt hours per kilogram. I could give you this in BTUs or joules. It's all the same. Here's gasoline, best lithium-ion batteries. Yes, electric vehicles and electric motors are 4 times more efficient than internal combustion engines. But still, take that 40x. Okay, call it 20x, call it 10x. Still a massive difference. What about the fleet? This is S&P Global Mobility. Cars are getting older. This looks like my fleet right here, my fleet. My wife and I have 4 vehicles. We have 2 kids at home. And the newest vehicle we have in our driveway is a 2012 Acura TSX. It's 12 years old. The oldest one's a 2005 Toyota 4Runner. I just put a new engine in it. I'm not going to buy a new car. Why would I buy a new car? I work at home, right? And I could probably afford one, a new 4Runner, but a new 4Runner is like 40, not 40, like 50 or 60 large. I got a new engine for 12. What about gasoline demand? Who's heard of the Lindy effect? Lindy effect says the longer something stays in motion or is that exists, the longer it's likely to stay, likely to keep going. I said that badly. If you live to be 80, you're more likely to live to 90 than, if you're not 80, right? If a book's in print for 20 years, it's likely to stay in print for another 10 or 20. Well, this is gasoline demand since 2000. It's been 9 million barrels a day for 23 years. Why do we think it's going to go away, particularly when the fleet is getting older? And now interest rates are high. And just yesterday, Jerome Powell said they're going to stay high for a long time. Makes buying a new car more expensive. People are going to keep their cars longer. That means they're going to be buying gasoline for a while to come. As far as this EV mandate, I'll just run through this really quickly because it really is, the timing of this is truly remarkable. So in February, Ford releases their earnings for 2023. They had $176 billion in revenue. They lost $4.7 billion on their electric vehicle segment. Their loss on EVs was greater than their net profit of $4.2 billion. And when you calculate the amount of loss per EV, which is what I did, and this is the headline that I ran in Substack, they lost about $65,000 for every EV they sold. I don't think they're going to make up for it in volume. That's February. This is mid-March. Hertz fires the CEO. Why? Because they said they were going to buy 100,000 Teslas, and what happened? Customers weren't renting them, the repairs were too expensive, and the depreciation was killing them. Exactly 5 days later, the Biden EPA announced their mandate for electric vehicles. You think they might watch what's happening at Hertz? Maybe those guys at Hertz know a little bit about what goes on in the car? No, not at all. And then the Washington Post at the end of last month said that despite $7.5 billion spent on electric charging, or rather allocated, appropriated for electric vehicle charging stations, they'd only built 7. I went too fast there. Okay, so what about Europe? What's going on with gas in Europe? Total disaster. In 2019, this is a screen grab from the IEA. 47% of the gas in Russia, or gas in the EU, was coming from Russia. End of last year was 12%. Europe is in the hurt locker in a big way, and they're not going to recover anytime soon. This is the deindustrialization of Europe. This is a screen grab from the International Energy Agency. This is a direct quote from their report on electricity in January. This is predominantly due to lower consumption in the industrial sector, chemical, steel, aluminum. Those aren't going to come back. They're not going to return to Europe. So smelters close down, they go somewhere else. These are the reductions in industrial use in 2022, a reduction of 55 terawatt hours and another 56 terawatt hours in industrial use in Europe. And this is going to cripple the entire economy, and particularly in Germany, because as Germany goes, so goes the rest of Europe. My German's not so good, but chemicals, chemical for pharma, inorganic chemicals, petrochem, polymers, pharma, all down. This just came out from the German Industrial Association. Meanwhile, U.S. LNG, some of which may be coming, some of that gas, some of those molecules may be coming from Colorado, absolutely essential to Europe's energy security. This is an EIA graphic. I'm just, did the screen grab here. The U.S. is by far the biggest supplier of LNG into Europe, more than Qatar, Russia, Algeria, et cetera. So why, this is my view, natural gas to nuclear. I've been saying the same thing now for 15 years. If we're serious about decarbonization, and I'm not opposed to decarbonization as long as we do it in a sensible way, natural gas to nuclear is the way forward. Why? Because they're scalable. Why natural gas? It's cheap. The resources are not just abundant, they're super abundant. And the gas-fired generation in the developing world is still tiny. Why nuclear? I shouldn't have to argue this. It's obvious. We need fuel diversification. The footprint is incredibly small, 2,000 times less land than wind, 200 times less than solar. But the challenges are real, including the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, the political risk, and fuel. But the fuel one, just to hit on this, because I want to make clear, I'm adamantly pro-nuclear. If you're anti-carbon dioxide and anti-nuclear, you're pro-blackout. I'm anti-blackout. I got blacked out for 2 days during Winter Storm Uri in 2021, which is one reason why I'm getting a Generac. But the U.S. is now dependent on 25% of the uranium oxide we need, and enriched uranium we use in America's nuclear fleet comes from Russia. And we're now vulnerable in terms of this supply chain. In the domestic production in the late 70s and early 80s, we were the kings of the world. Now we're producing essentially none. So what do I see as then for the issues here in Colorado? And in listening to the presentations this morning, it's clear this state is now a solid blue state. Used to be a purple state, arguably even a red state. Not so anymore. Solid blue state. And I'm seeing and have just observed over the last few years, you got climate activist NGOs who are very active, and they are continuing to attack the oil and gas sector here, and they're being very successful. Let's give them credit. But one of the things that wasn't discussed and is not getting the kind of attention is this net zero discussion, right, or the roadmap and the rest of it. I didn't hear any cost figures this morning, but I found a McKinsey study on this net zero roadmap. They estimate $168 billion in new costs by 2030. That's just 5 years away. Now, McKinsey doesn't say it in those terms. They say it's $80 billion investment and then $11 billion a year annually for the next 10 years. Well, if it's $11 billion, that's $88 billion plus 80, that's $168 billion, if my math is right. Who pays this number? From where will it come? My mother said, don't end your sentences with a preposition. Where's it going to come from? No, So who pays for that? Where's that going to come from? And how? Who pays? Where's the environmental justice, the energy justice in this? And then there's just a lot of uncertainty with the greenhouse gas rule, the methane rule, which is Quad O, is that right? The one that is going to affect particularly the stripper wells, particularly small producers, where they have to cut their methane. And then the LNG pause, the administration says, oh, it's just going to be a little while and then we'll lift it. Well, it was a purely political move, this LNG pause, but when will it end? But also, this bill that was the Senate bill, SB 159, was that right? They introduced it this session. I'm sure they're going to do it again. Why are there going to be referendums or net zero targets? But the question to me is always, who pays? Who are where is the social justice? Where is the equity in higher energy costs? Now, Colorado is still a relatively low-cost energy state, but if you go down the pathway for bad energy policy, those rates are going to go up, and the poor and the middle class are going to pay the most. Energy security is national security. Energy realism is energy humanism, and I'm for both of those. We need more realism. We need more numbers. We need more realistic talk. We need more understanding of the physics and math that are the basis of our energy and power systems. Now, will that be easy? No, of course not. Education is hard, particularly around an issue like energy, which is so ripe for, a lot of happy talk. It's so ripe for a lot of, oh, we'll make this plan, and and then the politicians, oh, we'll vote for that, and then they leave office and they're not the ones responsible for implementing it. But we have to have more sobriety about these issues because the energy is the economy. And as energy goes, so goes the American economy. And right now, the U.S. has an incredible advantage over the rest of the world, and we have an example from Europe about what not to do. This is my new docuseries. This is the best docuseries you'll ever see on electricity. Dizzy Dean said, it ain't bragging if you really done it. Well, I really done it. My colleague Tyson Culver did a fantastic job. Each episode's about 20 minutes. You can find it at juicetheseries.com. Did I mention juicetheseries.com? Did I mention it's free? It's on YouTube. juicetheseries.com. These are my books. I've written 6 of them. This is the latest one, A Question of Power, Electricity and the Wealth of Nations. Tell your friends. It's out in paperback now, by the way. Tell your friends, tell your neighbors, tell everyone you know. You don't have to read it. You just have to buy it. And if you buy it on your Kindle, I make a better royalty. I'm on Substack. It's free. robertbryce.substack.com. Like Substack because I can write what I want, how I want, when I want, with the graphics that I want, which is a remarkable luxury after being in this business for more than 30 years. I'm on Twitter. I'm on TikTok. Yeah. I'm on Instagram, LinkedIn, not on Facebook. Anyway, I'm easy to find on the Google. So follow me on the Google when you get a chance. It's a pleasure to be back in Colorado. Pleasure to be invited here. There are a lot of things happening. And this industry is enormous, it's complicated, and it involves a lot of people and a lot of money. And I commend you for what you're doing. And you're all playing a role. And my suggestion to you is if you want to keep going, pack a lunch. The battle for around energy policy is going to be ongoing, and it's going to be ongoing for many years to come. I wish you luck with it. Thank you. Down here we have we have time for a few questions. He's not giving me the hook yet, so.
Yep, y'all raise your hand. We've got plenty of time for questions, so let's have them.
Or holler them out and I'll repeat it. Yes, ma'am.
Thank you so much. Quinn Antis, Colorado Energy Office. I really appreciated your presentation, and just quickly wanted to say, if anyone actually does want to talk about cost, I'm really passionate about it. I just didn't have time to get into it this morning. Some of those numbers were not actually the right representation for Colorado, but my background is all around market economics, finance, things like this. So if you want to talk about it, please come find me. I would love to get into it. Thanks.
Sure. So what do you estimate the 10-year cost at for the net zero?
That depends on a lot of factors.
So the McKinsey numbers aren't right?
Well, I think your number that you were pulling on is more, I think, an estimate of 2050. I think we're also looking at, I think one of the assumptions that went into it that I disagree with is also that all of that is going to be borne by taxpayers or ratepayers. Really what we're trying to do is we're trying to get the market to a place where we have private investors, a lot of private actors moving in this space. One thing that we are seeing from the data is that we are projecting the carbon management field to be one of the most profitable industries in history. And so, we're also going to see a return on some of this. So that's more my field than the other fields, but I think there are a lot of questions about how we get to 2050 and also how we get to 2030. So within that, the cost estimations are not totally accurate because we're still mapping out what it looks like. But even within that, I think what's really interesting is we can figure out how we leverage public sector resources so that we can see that leverage, right? When we're talking about like financial mechanisms, you can see some amount of de-risking that happens from public sector resources to attract private capital to overall expedite market curves, bring the cost curves down. And so, I also think that some of those numbers are subject to change as we can really strategically leverage both public and private sector resources.
Okay, well, I don't argue those points, but the McKinsey number was the only number that I've seen that they put it out there. So the numbers are decarbonization in New York, a new study that just came out from the Empire Center, $4.9 trillion by 2050. The numbers are staggering, I think, no matter how you stack it. So, and my view is poop flows downhill. The ratepayer is always going to get the bill. But that's my view. By the way, I know some of you are taking slides or photos of my slides. I'm happy to share my slide deck. Email me, robert@robertbryce.com. I'll be happy to share the PDF with you. It's free. Once you share it, I'm happy to share it. So, anyone else?
There.
Yeah.
Well, I know that it's very difficult to predict the future. There have been some very recent breakthroughs, especially in the world of fusion, nuclear fusion management. We've achieved first plasma, we've achieved ignition. You were talking about being pro-nuclear, and again, we don't know if it's going to happen, but there's a lot of promising data saying that we will get to fusion probably within the next 5 to 10 years. So how would that change?
Well, happy to talk about fusion. My overall view is fission works great. Let's concentrate on fission. We're having enough trouble getting fission deployed in the United States. We have no new fission reactors under construction in the United States now. Vogtle 3 and Vogtle 4, adamantly pro-nuclear. Been saying the same thing for a long time. If we're serious about CO2 emission reduction, renewables are not going to get it. It's impossible. They can't do it. And we're going to waste a ton of money chasing this mirage of renewables. We have to be very serious about nuclear. But Vogtle 3 and Vogtle 4 massively over budget over time. But they're finished now. So we have no new nuclear reactors under construction in the United States. Those are fission reactors, where we have hundreds of years of operational data, right? Hundreds of operation years of data. We know we can operate them safely. So my view on fusion is great, but Vogtle 3 and 4 came online. That's 2,000 megawatts, roughly, of new capacity. The entire generation capacity in the United States today is 1.25 terawatts, 1.25 million megawatts. We've added 2,000 megawatts. So I'm all for it, but the hurdles on fusion, I've heard about fusion since I'm a kid. I'm an old man now. right? It was 50 years away then. Maybe it's still 10 or 15. But even if we have that breakthrough, the scaling up of any kind of new technology, given the enormity of the U.S. economy, is going to take a long time. So moving that needle, I'm all for it. And there's a lot of money that's gone. I don't forget how much that. There's an enormous amount of capital has been raised for these fusion startups, and they've had some positive signs. But changing it from the lab and the lab bench to commercial scale, that's what do they call it? The valley of death of commercialism or commerciality or whatever it is. But yeah, who else? Anyone?
Hi, I just had a quick question.
There you are. Hi.
Thanks for the presentation. So there's a lot more data right now on the health implications of indoor combustion of natural gas appliances. And I was curious to hear your thoughts. There's a direct tie to increased asthma rates, other comorbidities, respiratory distress. We have a byproduct of nitrogen dioxide. We have outdoor regulations from the EPA for nitrogen dioxide, but not indoor. And I know there's just more and more data. So I'd be curious to hear your thoughts on those health implications.
I think they're junk studies. I think they're junk studies. If you read the way that those models were done, they took plastic and visqueened off the kitchen and then ran the stove for hours, and then they measured air pollution. They measured the rates of gases in that segment. It's not a real world analysis. And so they claim that, and the Rocky Mountain Institute made that claim about 13% of asthma. It's a bogus number. They immediately backed off of it. So, but yet the media picked up on it right away, right? Further, if you look back, okay, so we've had gas stoves in America for 100 years? 100 years. And now all of a sudden, at the very same time that Rocky Mountain Institute, Sierra Club, all these other groups are saying, oh, we want to ban gas, we want to electrify everything, and then suddenly, oh, there's a study that says they're actually bad for you. I don't think that's coincidence. So I don't believe those numbers. I think that's manufactured. And I appreciate the question, but I think that's junk science. Am I being a little too honest today? Sometimes I feel the audience, they're going, is he really saying that? I was in Washington. I spoke at the National Association of Regulatory Utility Commissioners in late February, and it was a big crowd. It was, 1,800 people or something. And I said, the only thing dumber than onshore wind is offshore wind. And I could almost say, you say that about offshore wind? I said it. I mean it. The only thing dumber than onshore wind is offshore wind. Okay, Kirby, I think I've stunned them all into silence. Or they're tired of hearing me, or both, or all of the above. But I don't know. Kirby's not here. Where'd Kirby go? There he is. Kirby, you going to give me the hook? It's 10 after. 3 or 4. They're tired of me. Oh, here you go. Yes, sir. Go ahead. Shout it out.
Okay. As far as nuclear goes, and you're saying that that's part of the transition, or is going to help, is a viable source of electricity. What are your thoughts on possible, nuclear waste, and then also
Sure.
the time that it takes to go from planning to actual
Construction, yeah, and deployment. The questions are on nuclear waste and then the timeline for new construction and permitting and building. All valid questions. The waste issue is not a scientific issue, it's a political issue. We know what to do. The French handle all of their new high-level waste, they put it in one place in La Hague, the size of a soccer field. If the French can do it, we can do it. They're not that smart. Why don't we have that here? Because, one of the reasons is Harry Reid. Right? When Obama ran for president, he needed Harry Reid, who was the Senate Majority Leader at that time. He said, hey, support me, Harry. Harry said, I'll do it if you come out and say you're not going to use Yucca Mountain. And a few weeks after Obama became president, he said, we're not going to do Yucca Mountain. So a project that had been in place for 20, 30 years that was going to be the nuclear waste repository because of politics, not because of science, was suddenly taken off the table. And now we don't have a home for all of the nuclear used fuel. I don't necessarily like to call it waste. The used nuclear fuel, I was in Tyler, Texas 3 weeks ago, and the guy from Encore, who's the local utility there, I said, yeah, we've had a lot of blackouts. He said, don't call them blackouts, call them load shedding events. I said, okay. Load shedding events, just for Encore. The Nevada site, the Nevada Waste Repository, Yucca Mountain, works. It could work, right? There's no one out there, a bunch of rattlesnakes and cactus. It would be fine. But it was a political decision not to put it there. So now there's nowhere under the Nuclear Waste Policy Act of 1982 for all of these nuclear utilities to store their waste, and so they're suing the federal government. The federal government's paying them because they have to store that waste or that use nuclear fuel. We could solve that problem if we had the political will. It could be done like that. As far as the timelines, it's a very good question. And Vogtle was way over time, approximately twice the length that was expected. The budget was twice what was expected. The cost of power from Vogtle 3 and 4 will be about 13 or 14 cents a kilowatt hour, which is not necessarily cheap, but in 50 years it's going to look cheap. So, but we have to build more. We have to build them fast. We have to build many to make them cheaper, right? The learning rate has to increase. And small modular reactors may be the way to do that. I'll wait to be convinced. But whatever the technology, whatever the chemistry, whether it's light water, molten salt, high temperature gas, we got to build them by the bunches, by the dozens. And when we build them at scale, we'll see reductions in cost. But if we're going to build them in onesies and twosies, costs are going to stay high for a long time. Okay, all right, thank you all very much. I appreciate it.